morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Corpus Christi. My name is Lauren Cantatori-Kazi. My pronouns are she, her, and I am very pleased to be your worship associate this morning. Come, whoever you are. We welcome you. We know you come here for different reasons, to find community, to seek spiritual and personal truths, to question, to nurture your heart and soul, to be nurtured, to explore new ideas, to find comfort, and perhaps to find the answers to some of your bigger questions. We know you come from different places, different religions, perhaps no religion, different beliefs, and different backgrounds. We hope you will find comfort, connection, challenge, and love here. We hope you will find ways to provide outreach to others here in our church home, our local community, and in our world. We welcome you. We have a few announcements this morning, several announcements this morning. Hospitality team would still like to include somebody's smiling face in their work, and it's really kind of fun. The group is fun to be around, and it doesn't take a lot of time. So if you're interested, please see Claire Houlihan after the service. Okay, Kirk Newport will lead our twice monthly meditation group this Wednesday, July 1st at 6 p.m. This coming Friday, July 3rd, the book club will discuss the 4 agreements. It'll be the 4th agreement that will be discussed. If you did not participate during the last session, you're still free to come and see Joy Wright for more information. Also, Joy is still wanting to hear from you to vote on the next book, so please see her after church. Saturday, July 4th at 11 a.m., Tacos Not Bombs will be assembling sandwich bags for our unhoused neighbors. All supplies are provided, and donations are always welcome. You can drop donations off during Dawn's office hours on Monday and Thursday, or bring them with you any Sunday. For more information, see Kelly Thompson. Okay, and after the service on July 5th, I am chairing the All-American Potluck, and there will be we haven't had a potluck in a while, and I thought this might be a fun way to celebrate. So we will have a sign-up sheet. There is a sign-up sheet in the foyer, so please add your name to that, and we'll have a great time. The humanist discussion group following next Sunday's service is canceled due to the potluck. We will see everyone in August. Our next Board of Trustees meeting is not coming up on Tuesday, July 14th, because we are going to essentially recess for the summer, and we will have our board retreat on August 1st, and then our next board meeting will be in August. Okay, as always, check the information on the boards out in the hallway, and check your order of service for regularly occurring events. And if you don't read your weekly e-blast when it comes to your mailbox, feel free to scan the QR code on the back of your order of service, and you can read it right there. Thus endeth the announcements. It's our custom in this church to offer visitors and newcomers an opportunity to introduce themselves if they feel comfortable doing so. And if it's your first time here, or you just feel ready to say hello after coming for a while, we invite you to stand as you are able, or raise your hand and tell us where you are from. And Ren will bring the microphone so that our guests online can get to know you too. Are there any visitors or newcomers that would like to introduce themselves? Okay. Well, we are glad you are here, and please join us for coffee and conversation after our service. Our service will now begin. Please rise as you are willing and able to join the choir in singing this hymn.
Hymn number 130. If you want to grab a book, there's some on the chairs.
I would like to invite Tristan up to light our chalice this morning as I share these chalice lighting words. I shall pass this way but once. Any good thing I can do, any kindness I can show to another human being, let me do it now. Let me not defer it nor neglect it, for I shall not pass this way again. And that is attributed to various poets. Please rise and embody your spirit for the affirmation of our covenant. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace,
to knowledge and freedom, to serve human needs to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the divine. Thus do we covenant with each other and with all we hold sacred.
You may be seated.
Just stop your crying, it's a sign of times.
Welcome to the final show. I hope you're wearing your best clothes. You can't bribe the door on your way to the sky. You look pretty good down here, but you ain't really good. We never learn, we've been here before. Why are we always stuck and running from the bullets? The bullets. We never learn, we've been here before. Why are we always stuck and running from your bullets? Your bullets. Just stop your crying, it's a sign of the times. We gotta get away from here. We gotta get away from here. Just stop your crying, it'll be alright. They told me that the end is near. We gotta get away from here. Just stop your crying, have the time of your life. Breaking through the atmosphere. Things look pretty good from here. Remember, everything will be alright. We can meet again somewhere, somewhere far away from here. We never learn, we've been here before. Why are we always stuck and running from the bullets? The bullets. We never learn, we've been here before. Why are we always stuck and running from the bullets? The bullets. Just stop your crying, it's a sign of the times. We gotta get away from here. We gotta get away from here. Stop your crying, baby, it'll be alright. They told me that the end is near. We gotta get away from here. We never learned, we've been here before. Why are we always stuck and running from your bullets? The bullets. We never learned, we've been here before. Why are we always stuck and running from your bullets? Your bullets. We don't talk enough. We should open up before it's all too much. Will we ever learn? We've been here before. It's just what we know. Just crying, baby, it's a sign of the times. The times. We gotta get away. We've got to get away. We've got to get away. Just stop your crying, it's a sign of the times. We've gotta get away from here. We gotta get away from here.
Cherry, your RE direct coordinator here at U2C3. My name is Tess Cherry, and our story today is Lion and the Mouse. Once upon a time, there was a very little mouse. The little mouse liked to scamper about among the trees in the jungle. One day, quite by accident, he ran across the paws of a sleeping lion. This woke the lion up from his peaceful afternoon nap. As you can imagine, the lion was not at all pleased. He did not like to be woken up before he was ready. It made him grumpy, very grumpy. The lion opened his eye, then he opened the other eye. The lion reached out and angrily grabbed the tiny mouse in his big paws. The lion was just about to eat him when the mouse cried out, "Please be kind, sir. I didn't mean to disturb you. If you let me go, I will be forever grateful. I promise that one day I will return your kindness by helping you." The lion laughed out loud. How could such a little animal ever help so great an animal as a lion? He asked. All the same, the lion decided to let the mouse go. Not long after, the mouse was once again scurrying about among the trees in the jungle. Suddenly, the sound of a loud roar rose up in the air. Roar! The mouse shivered with fright and considered running in the opposite direction. However, the mouse bravely set off to discover who or what had made such a loud noise. The mouse came upon a small clearing in the trees. There he saw the very same lion trapped in a hunter's net made of ropes. The lion was roaring ferociously. He was also struggling to free himself from the tangled web of ropes. Sadly, no matter how hard he struggled, he was not able to escape the hunter's trap. Once again, the little mouse thought about running away. The lion's roars were so frightening, but he also remembered his promise to the lion. He had promised that if the lion let him go, he would return his kindness. He was a mouse who kept his promises. He thought very carefully and came up with a plan. He ran to the side of the great beast and began to gnaw on the ropes. He kept on gnawing and gnawing. With his sharp teeth, he gnawed until he could no more. At last, he made a hole in the net big enough for the lion to escape through. The noble lion sprang from the net and shook his mane. Then he looked up at the tiny mouse. The tiny mouse looked down at the lion. "Thank you," the lion said. "You kept your promise." And with that, the lion sprang forward and disappeared into the shadow cast by the trees. So the moral of the story is trustworthiness is shown when you are reliable. Keep your promises and do what you say you will do. It is also shown when you tell the truth and are honest with both words and actions, even when it may be difficult, by having the courage to do the right thing and by being loyal to your friends, family, and community. You demonstrate that you can be trusted, and remember, no act of kindness, no matter how small, is never wasted. invite the young and young at heart to join me in our reading.
After our meditation reading and time of silence, and when the music begins, all who would like to are invited to come to the chalice table and light a candle representing a joy or sorrow that you might be holding in your heart today. Please come up one at a time using the middle aisle, and keep in mind the further lit candles are placed in the sand, the less of a risk to the next person's hand. And if you are with us online today, you are welcome to share your joys and sorrows in the chat feature. As we gather together, may we remember, when you share with me what is most important to you, that is where the listening begins. When I show you that I hear you, when I say your life matters, that is where the compassion begins. When I open the door to greet you, that's where the hospitality begins. When I venture out to bring you to shelter, that is where love begins. When I risk my comfort to ease your suffering, when I acted against hatred, violence, and injustice, that is where courage begins. When we experience the full presence of each other because of our shared humanity, because of our differences, this is where holy gratitude begins. May this space be a table that is not complete until all are welcome. May this table be a space of beauty where together we create a series of miracles, and where all that we share is sacred. I now invite you into a time of silent reflection. speaker this morning, Lucas Wilson, is a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Toronto, Mississauga, and formerly held the Justice, Equity, and Transformation Postdoctoral Fellowship at the University of Calgary. He is the author At Home with the Holocaust and editor of Shame, Sex, Attraction, Survivor Stories of Conversion Therapy. And he put a presentation on here several weeks back talking about that. His work has appeared in The Advocate, LGBTQ Nation, Queerly, and Religion Dispatches. Please welcome Dr. Lucas Wilson.
Hello, everyone. It's wonderful to be joining you today. I'm here in Sao Paulo, Brazil, but any excuse I can, I have to be in Texas, even if virtually, I'll take it. So today we're going to be talking about conversion therapy. And whenever I offer a talk about conversion therapy, I think it's important to offer a breakdown of the vocabulary that conversion practitioners or conversion therapists use, and the vocabulary that academics or activists, survivors or allies use. And of course, these two different lexicons are quite different, and for a very good reason. So let's start with conversion therapists. Conversion therapists don't typically use the term conversion therapy, right? They know the optics of the term. They know that the general population has an idea what conversion therapy is. And so because of that, they opt for different language to name the dirty work that they're doing. They use euphemistic language to cover over or mask or obfuscate the practices that they perform. And so conversion practitioners, instead of using the term conversion therapy, for a long time, they use terms like reparative therapy or change therapy. But even these terms are quite recognizable today. And so those terms have fallen out of vogue as well. And instead of these terms, if we're thinking specifically in the counseling or the clinical context, the words that or the terms they're typically going to use include reintegrative therapy, desistance therapy, reorientation therapy, and gender exploration therapy. And all of these terms have this valence of credibility, right? They sound respectable, but the moment you do like the quickest of Google searches, you'll find out that they aren't. They are synonymous with conversion therapy. But even though these are the terms that are, again, used in the counseling or clinical context, the vast majority of conversion practices actually don't happen in counseling or clinical contexts. Instead, they happen in religious spaces, and more particularly high control Christian spaces. And so the language shifts a little bit when we enter into these religious spaces. Typically, the terms you're going to hear when naming conversion therapy without using the term conversion therapy in religious spaces, the terms include one of three typically, and these are terms that are always used in relationship to gender or sexuality. So the terms are biblical counseling, biblical worldview counseling, and pastoral counseling in conjunction with gender or sexuality. Obviously, not all pastoral counseling or biblical counseling is conversion therapy, by no means. But when these terms are used in relation to gender or sexuality, 9 times out of 10, if not 10 times out of 10, we're talking about conversion therapy. And so this is, again, the language that practitioners use. As for academics, activists, allies, survivors, we typically will use the term conversion therapy in large part because it's the most publicly recognizable term, right? We don't have to do explain what exactly we're talking about if we can just use the shorthand of conversion therapy. We also will use terms like conversion efforts or conversion practices, and we use them interchangeably oftentimes. But some folks don't necessarily feel comfortable using the term conversion, right? The word has a lot of baggage. And so folks will instead opt for the term SOGIES. And SOGIES is sexual orientation and gender identity and expression change efforts, which is quite a mouthful. And so instead of using that long term, they'll opt for SOGIES or just change efforts for short. And really, it's up to you what you feel most comfortable with using. Again, I'll use all these terms most likely synonymously throughout the presentation. But again, this gives you a good lay of the land. And it also gives you an understanding of, if you're ever looking on a church's website or a counselor's website or, a ministry's website, and you see any of the terms that like reintegrative therapy or reorientation therapy, gender exploration therapy, again, these are dog whistles that you can keep your, ears to the ground and hear and to sort of figure out whether or not a ministry or a church or an organization is practicing conversion therapy. And so I do think I'm preaching to the choir. I do think that most folks in here know what conversion therapy is, but just to make sure we're all on the same page, a quick working definition of conversion therapy really are programmatic efforts to change an individual's sexual orientation, gender identity, and/or gender expression. Right? These are efforts to repair or reduce or suppress non-normative genders and non-normative sexualities in favor of heterosexuality and heteronormativity. These are just efforts to change people from who they are into who they're not in terms of gender or sexuality. And so all conversion practices are undergirded by what researchers refer to as conversion ideology. And conversion ideology are pejorative beliefs and teachings that frame queerness as inadequate, as incomplete, as broken, as sick, as sinful, as degenerate. I mean, insert your negative descriptor here, right? Understanding queerness as a problem to be fixed or an ailment to be cured. And conversion practitioners argue that there are one or more causes for queerness for each individual who is queer. And some of these causes or sources for queerness, according to conversion practitioners, include damaged or inadequate relationships with parents. And this is pretty much the most common explanation for why queers are queer. And they'll argue very much, they'll employ a very pseudo-Freudian approach to human sexuality while knowing very little about Freud, but neither here nor there. And they'll argue that, again, it's this negative or damaged or inadequate relationship that one has with one's mom or one's dad. Other arguments or other, perceived sources for queerness include damaged or inadequate relationships with siblings or figures of authority, negative experiences with the quote unquote opposite sex, right? So Johnny goes and asks a woman out, she says no, asks another woman out, she says no, asks another woman out, she says no. And he's like, well, plan B, let's go for men. This is as ridiculous as it sounds, but it really is one of the explanations that these folks use. There's also the belief that pornography can cause queerness. The belief that negative spiritual influences, i.e. demonic possession, can be a source for queerness. And then the narrative of the predatory member of the quote unquote same sex, right? So young Sally has a gym teacher who's a lesbian. She preys upon Sally and boom, Sally's a lesbian, right? These really are the narratives that these folks use. These are the most common narratives that they use when trying to explain where queerness comes from. And in order to address these root causes or sources, conversion practitioners employ a number of practices. The most common practice you're typically going to see is talk therapy counseling. And this is oftentimes done in relationship to or conjunction with behavioral modification, right? So to change how someone acts in terms of their gender performance, so that over time, they're not just acting like a quote unquote real man or like a quote unquote real woman, but they're becoming a real man or a real woman. And part of that gender or that understanding of real women or real men is an essentialist understanding of gender and sexuality. So if you're a real man and you perform masculinity on a daily basis, or if you're a real woman and you perform femininity on a habitual basis, that your sexual orientation will change in turn. And so this is really, again, behavioral modification is quite common. In addition to talk therapy and behavioral modification, other conversion practices include aversion therapy. Perhaps the best known example of aversion therapy is electroshock therapy, something that is still done today, despite or in contrast to public or popular opinion. There's also support groups and camps and inpatient programs and outpatient programs. I would argue that transphobic healthcare practices constitute conversion practices. We can talk more about that after. Also corrective prayer, right? So laying on of hands and praying for folks with the effort or in the hopes of changing that person in terms of gender or sexuality. Forced celibacy, right? So pushing folks to remain chaste as a way of changing their sexuality. There's also coerced sexual relationships, so pushing folks into mixed orientation marriages so that over time they'll magically become attracted to their spouse. Also coerced sexual relations, which is another way of saying rape as a conversion practice, which is again something that still happens. And so these are some of the practices that are employed in order to change folks, obviously with no efficacy, but neither here nor there. And even though these practices are not effective and they've never changed anyone, there are numerous consequences for conversion practices. And these consequences are psychological, social, emotional, spiritual, and physical in nature. And if we're thinking about the psychological and social consequences, we can think of guilt, anxiety, shame, difficulty celebrating LGBTQ identities, difficulty in romantic or sexual relationships, isolation, poor self-esteem, anger, disruption in family relationships, and suicidal ideation. And it's actually not just suicidal ideation, it's actually lifetime suicidal ideation as a consequence for undergoing conversion therapy. Other research has suggested that folks who have undergone conversion practices have a greater dependence on drugs and alcohol. They run the risk of increased chances of experiencing homelessness, negative impacts on identity formation, and overall poorer mental health. As for the spiritual consequences, it's nice when I get to speak to a church, because I think oftentimes when I'm speaking in academic or secular context, people think, why in the world are we talking about spiritual consequences? We don't need to talk about this, but we absolutely do, right? If in fact, as the research suggests, that the vast majority of folks who undergo conversion therapy undergo these practices in religious contexts, this is of course an important piece of the puzzle. Just because someone is no longer in conversion therapy doesn't mean that they no longer have religious commitments. You can take someone out of conversion therapy, but you don't necessarily take them out of the church. And again, they don't necessarily give up their faith. So when we're thinking about some of the consequences, again, it's super important to be talking about the spiritual. And so some of the consequences are negative impacts on spiritual self-identity, right? How people show up in the world in terms of religion or spirituality or faith. Conversion practices have a negative impact on folks' ability to construct existential meaning. It also impacts their ability to connect with what they refer to as God or the divine or a higher power. And when conversion practices happen in religious contexts, particularly in churches, there's a negative impact on folks' relationship to their spiritual or religious communities. As for physical consequences, if we're talking about aversion therapy, I think it's quite obvious what the physical consequences are, but there are other psychosomatic consequences that folks cite after going through conversion therapy. And to give you an idea, a brief overview, a brief history of conversion practices in North America, I always think it's important to first note, even though I'm not going to go into detail, but it's important to note that conversion practices have been happening for centuries in what we refer to as North America, right? That colonizers and uninvited settlers came to what we now refer to as, the United States and Canada and Mexico. And when they came to this continent, they brought with them a lot of gendered expectations and gender roles. And so they tried to map those on to indigenous populations and change folks in terms of gender or sexuality, those who were sexually or gender diverse. And again, with no efficacy, but neither here nor there. I'm going to focus on the modern context, but again, I would be remiss not to mention this long, long history in North America. And so we're going to fast forward to the mid-1800s, and in the mid-1800s, this is where the words homosexuality and heterosexuality come into the first modern lexicon ever. Up until this point, there was no word for homosexual or heterosexual. This is again when they were invented. And before these terms came into existence, folks didn't understand sexuality in terms of identity. Instead, they understood sexuality in terms of actions or specific activities, right? So there was no such thing as, a gay person, right? There was instead someone who practiced sodomy. And so with that being said, when these terms came into existence, this is where that shift really happened, where people were understanding folks as sexual beings, as heterosexual or homosexual. And of course, once these terms were introduced, immediately homosexuality was seen as the negative measure against which heterosexuality was understood. And so folks started to think, okay, how do we change folks who are homosexual and make them heterosexual? In the early years in this modern context, forced lobotomies were quite common, so very much in the medical context. But then that was again in the late 1800s and into the 1900s. And then it's actually a Canadian invention, and I am Canadian, I should say, that the folks were starting to introduce the practice of testicular transplantation. So taking the testicles of a presumably heterosexual man and implanting them into a homosexual man as a way to change his sexual orientation. This was something that was done in the early years of the 20th century. Then we fast forward to the 1950s and 1960s, and it was around this time that folks were starting to peddle a lot of narratives about why folks were queer. Obviously, throughout this entire time, there were theorists thinking about where does homosexuality come from, where does heterosexuality come from. We can, of course, think to our friend Freud and his friends. But again, in the 1950s and 1960s, this is where the narrative or the theory of the overbearing mother came into vogue, right? So for young gay boys, it was believed that they were gay because their mothers were overbearing, and they kept them within the world of femininity. And then by the time they hit puberty, they went for what was quote unquote opposite of them. And with this binary understanding of gender and sexuality, what was opposite were boys and then eventually men. And this is again how they understood how young gay boys would eventually become why they were queer. There was also the belief that there was, or one of the theories that was in circulation at the time as well, was the theory of childhood sexual trauma, right? That molestation causing, would be a cause or a source for why folks are queer. And so these were the more common theories. The practices at this time were certainly talk therapy. There was also a big push for aversion therapy, electroshock therapy at this time. From Harvard to Brigham Young University, there were a number of institutions that were practicing aversion therapy. This all of what I've covered so far has really been happening in the secular context, right? So in the psychological, psychiatric, and medical communities, these were a lot of the conversion practices were taking place. This isn't to say that there weren't conversion practices happening in religious spaces. There were, we know that there were, but by and large, the big push was actually in the secular context. But then we hit the 1970s and things shift. 1973 was a very important year for two reasons as it relates to conversion therapy. First, the American Psychological Association declassifies homosexuality as a pathology, right? It was no longer understood as a mental disorder, which of course was a win for queer rights, a very exciting moment. But the problem was this was the same year that I always say Jesus hit the scene. And what I mean by that is that the first ex-gay ministry, which was a Christian ministry, emerged in 1973 in North America. There actually was an ex-gay ministry, ex-gay Christian ministry that emerged in Australia first. But if we're thinking about North America specifically, the first was Love in Action. They came out of Southern California. A year later, also from Southern California, emerged Exit, the ex-gay interventionist team. And this organization, Exit, organized a conference 2 years later, also in California in 1976. And they brought together different delegates from ex-gay ministries that were starting to emerge. And they came together and they formed an organization that they named Exodus. Exodus would eventually become Exodus International, which was the largest, most powerful, and most far-reaching ex-gay ministry in the world. It was very well resourced, it was very powerful, and it had a lot of sway within the white Christian nationalist movement. And so Exodus, like Exit, like Love in Action, all of these organizations in the early years were really drawing upon theological explanations for queerness, as well as theologically informed approaches to changing folks, right? So they argued that the reason why folks were queer was because of sin. And in order to change folks, different spiritual exercises or practices could be employed in order to change, folks' queerness. So again, prayer, reading scripture, being in community, also fasting, right? These different spiritual exercises. However, once we get into the later 70s and into the 80s, this is where these organizations start to join forces with ex-gay researchers. And I use the term researcher very loosely, right? These were folks who had PhDs, sure, but they were marrying a lot of really crazy bunk science theories that had been disproven with theology and arguing that this would allow folks to change if you were only to follow these certain programs that they were introducing. And so these ex-gay ministries were gaining, at least in their own, estimation, credibility, because all of a sudden they said, hey, look, we have these, researchers whose research backs up our claims that you can change. They are credible because, again, they have PhDs. Isn't this phenomenal? As for the ex-gay researchers, what they were gaining from these ex-gay ministries was money, right? All of a sudden, they had people who were buying their books and their tapes and inviting them to their churches and their conferences. And so these two groups joined this symbiotic relation, or formed a symbiotic relationship, and they they sort of grow and snowball together into the height of the ex-gay movement, which really was in the 80s and into the 90s. But what we started to see at the end of the 90s was a number of the leaders fall from grace, right? So we could think of John Polk, who was the chairman of Exodus International. He was found in a Washington, D.C. gay bar, and Wayne Besson took a photo of him and then published it the next day. It was kind of a shot to his credibility as someone who had changed. There were other folks who were found in places like meth-fueled orgies in motel rooms across the country. Again, not the cutest optics when you're trying to claim that you've changed your sexual orientation. So with these different leaders falling from grace, not only was the actual story of them being caught, in a very compromising position, pun intended, it was also that some of these folks on their way out of the movement, in fact, acknowledged not only that they didn't change, clearly, but also that no one had changed. And looking at these sort of, confessions, today one would think, oh gosh, wouldn't that have been the end of the ex-gay movement? Regrettably, no. What happened was that there was a shift in how these organizations operated, but they certainly didn't close down, and they certainly didn't stop claiming that change was possible. What they started to do, instead of focusing on those outside of their communities, they started to focus inwardly. So they started to advertise just within church networks, religious networks. And again, they didn't necessarily have the same visibility as they did before on, billboards or magazine covers or in classified ads. And so they shifted their focus inwards. We then get to 2013, and this is when this was a bombshell moment. This is when Exodus closes its doors, and as they close their doors, they actually apologize for the damage that they had done. And again, one would expect this is when, if the flagship organization, Exodus International, closes its doors, wouldn't this be the end of the movement? Again, unfortunately not. Instead, a lot of groups just splintered off and continue to exist until today. The best known is perhaps the Changed movement, which is also coming out of California. I don't know what's going on in California, but it's coming out of Bethel Church, and they have a conversion therapy program and organization that's centered there. They're quite active on social media, so if you do look them up, you can find them. And they are, again, not just active on social media, but also in protests and in person. I'm going to wrap up with just giving a little bit of information about the prevalence of conversion practices. And I'd be more than happy to stay after the service to chat with anyone who's interested. But by way of conclusion, the numbers that we have for how many folks have undergone conversion therapy in the US specifically are coming out of the Williams Institute out of UCLA. They estimate that about 700,000 folks have undergone conversion practices, and this is about 7% of LGBTQ communities. And I always think about this number as being super helpful, but it is also something that I think is actually quite, how do I say? I think that this estimate is quite low. I don't think that that's actually accurate. I'm very grateful for the research that they've done, but there's a problem. There's one main problem that really researchers will never overcome, and that's the issue of self-reporting. The issue is a two-pronged issue. First, a lot of folks don't understand their experience in conversion therapy as conversion therapy. So I can use myself as an example. I went through 4 years of conversion therapy at Liberty University, which is Jerry Falwell's school. For those who know who Jerry Falwell is, you know what kind of school Liberty is. For those who don't know who Jerry Falwell is, count your blessings. But I went to his school and I went through their conversion therapy program. And when I left, I went to grad school. I went to a real university. And it was there that I was talking to one of my office mates, and she was sort of fascinated that I had gone to this US school that was called Liberty University in Canada. That's a very weird thing. And people are like, that sounds like very, very US. Okay. And so I was this, at the time I was still an evangelical. And so I think I was kind of an alien to her, and she was trying to figure out like, who is this guy? And when she was asking me a bunch of questions, so I was answering, and I was telling her about my time meeting with this pastor. And I described my experience as pastoral counseling, as going through pastoral counseling. And when I finished talking about it, she looked at me and she's like, so you went through conversion therapy then? And I, of course, had heard of conversion therapy, but I never once thought about myself as going through conversion therapy. Again, I thought about it as pastoral counseling. I then went and did a quick Google search, and again, check. I went through definitional conversion therapy without necessarily even knowing it. So all of this to say, the problem with self-reporting is that for a lot of folks who've undergone conversion practices, they have never understood their experience as conversion therapy. So when they answer questionnaires, when they answer, surveys about, have you undergone conversion therapy, a lot of folks are just going to say no, because they think that they just met with the pastor or they met with their parent or whatever. Nonetheless, they've gone through, definitional conversion therapy. So that's the first problem, self-reporting. Second problem is that we're talking about groups who are, again, largely in these high control religious spaces. So when someone comes along and says, hey, I'm doing a study on, conversion therapy or queerness in general, these are folks who are not going to participate in these surveys, right? They're highly, highly skeptical of pretty much everyone, but especially the Godless Academy, researchers, academics. They're scared of evidence-based claims. You can think of, COVID-19, where masks became a political issue for a lot of these folks. We can think of where do a lot of anti-vaxxers come from. These are folks who distrust medical and academic findings. And so when someone comes along and says, hey, do you want to, participate in the survey? They're going to say no. And so the numbers that we have are therefore going to be skewed. They're not going to be necessarily accurate. So this again gives you a lay of the land of the prevalence of conversion practices in the US today. About half the states have banned conversion therapy. And there, of course, was a recent Supreme Court case that, again, we don't have time to talk about, but I'd be more than happy to talk about it after. So I'm going to put a pin in it there. I'm not sure how we can proceed here, but if anyone's interested in chatting right now, I'd be more than happy to extend our time together. Sounds great. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wilson. That was wonderful. And now is the time that we participate in the chair of our church community by giving and receiving the offering. If you're contributing to your pledge today, please write pledge on your check or the cash envelope. And when the music begins, the ushers, or before the music begins, the ushers will present the offering basket to you. In addition to the basket, and for those joining us at home, we have several options for making your offering. Please use the links on screen to give through our website, by PayPal, or by using the mobile app, Banco mobile app. Your offering, no matter how you make it, will be gratefully received.
I wanna be touched, be loved, I wanna heal, be hugged. It's just the two of us, or that's what we swore. And if I've lost my charm, apologies do no harm, 'cause you got a hold my heart and I know it's worn. So won't you please spare me indignity, and won't you please give me some decency, and won't you please call it if our time is through, 'cause I know that we fall apart when nothing's new, nothing's new. I wanna be close to you, but I don't know what to do, 'cause if we are near to through, it may make it worse. And if I start to grieve, 'cause feels like you're about to leave, forgive me, I'm not naive, I've been here before. So won't you please spare me indignity, and won't you please give me some decency, and won't you please call it if our time is through, 'cause I know that we fall apart when nothing's new, 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 nothing's new. nothing's new, nothing's new, nothing's new, nothing's new, nothing's new. Please spare me indignity, and won't you please give me some decency, and won't you please call it if our time is through, 'cause I know that we fall apart when nothing's new, nothing's new.
We leave this gathered community, but we don't leave our connection. Our concerns, our care for each other, our service to each other, to the world, and to our faith continues. Until we are together again, be strong, be well, be true, and be loving. And please rise as you are willing and able for our closing song.
As we leave this friendly place, love give light to every face. May the kindness which we learn light our hearts till we return.
Go in peace, my friends, and if you'd like to stay after and talk with Dr. Wilson, we'll have that available. Thank you.